Hi everyone, it's Tammy with Shabby Fabrics. Look at this beautiful quilt. If you haven't signed up yet for Beach House Patchwork Block of the Month, you better jump over to the website right now. We have very few spots remaining. I wanted to bring this to you today because I want to show you the elements that are used to make up the blocks in the Beach House Block of the Month. First, I do want to touch base on a few things that go with it. You might want to pick up an oops kit. When you make a mistake cutting, then you still have your fabric. I highly recommend adding this on. You will love this fabric. It's so beautiful. The other thing is your backing. This is an option that you can add on to this quilt. The other thing that we have are the project bags. These are the Quilt As You Go project bags by June Taylor. This is the perfect place to keep your oops kit, your pattern, any of your scraps as you're making this block of the month, because you're going to get 2 blocks at a time, and you can just keep all your stuff right in this bag. That works great. I highly recommend these project bags. What fun. All right, I'm going to clear this area and I'm going to come back and we'll get started on making the blocks. All right, the first element I'd like to show you is fast flying geese. I love making flying geese blocks like this. You're going to make 4 at a time. They're quick, they're easy, and they don't waste a lot of fabric. Normally when you make flying geese, you're cutting rectangles, and then we're doing sew and flip corners, and so you're wasting all that fabric that you're cutting away, and you're just throwing in the garbage or trying to set aside for another project. And then I just have a ton of these half square triangles sitting around. So we love fast flying geese, and that's how we write all of our patterns whenever we do flying geese. So if you don't know what fast flying geese are, I'm going to show you. So we're going to start with a large square, and we're going to take 2 smaller squares like this that are going to go right sides together like this. All right, so what we need to do is we need to draw a line down the center of this and then sew a 1/4 inch on either side of the line. So I'm going to use a friction pen, and I'm going to use a Creative Grid seam guide. What this does is this gives me an exact 1/2 inch on either side of my center line. So now when I draw a line on this, I get to sew on the line, right? I sew on the line now rather than sewing a 1/4 inch away from the line. I never know where a 1/4 inch away from the line is. Depends on your foot, on your machine. Is it a true 1/4? Is it a scant 1/4? Is it a 1/4 at all? Who knows? So I usually will take the time to do this. You can see I'm using a spinning mat. It just goes back and forth, and I just put a quick line on my back of my squares. All right, so now I'm going to put one in the upper corner. I'm going to secure it with a Clover extra fine patchwork pin, but I want to keep those pins out of my sewing area. I don't want those pins anywhere close to my sewing lane because I just want to sew. I'm not going to stop and remove pins. So we'll put one on here, and now I'm going to put one on the other side, just like this. One more pin. There we go. All right, now do you see this overlap I have going right here? What I like to do is I like to hold the corner like this and take a sharp pair of scissors and just clip that away. You see how I just cut that right away? Just like that. Okay, now you're going to sew on either side of that line, on the lines, and it looks like this. Okay, so I have sewn on the lines right there. I'm going to take my pins out like this, and now I'm simply going to cut this in half. So I'm going to take the 1/4 inch line on my Creative Grids 4.5 by 8.5 inch ruler. I have a 1/4 inch line, and a 1/4 inch is designated by the dotted line right here. So I just set that dotted line right on my seam line. I'm going to cut this block straight in half. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press this. So I'm going to press, I'm going to set my seam, and now I'm just going to fold these right open, just like this. You can use a little bit of steam if you'd like. I always use a wool pressing mat when I do patchwork like this. I find a wool pressing mat is going to sharpen your creases in your fabric, give you a much cleaner crease. That fabric stays right where I want it, just like that. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a square. I'm going to take one of these back, and we're going to line it up in the corner just like this and pin it on. One here and one here. And again, I'm just going to sew directly on the line. And I did that ahead of time too, just like this. All right, so let's take our pins out. I'm going to trim it out exactly as before. I'm just using that 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to cut this in half. You can see I have no wasted fabric yet, right? Now I have flying geese like this. Let's set our seam and open that right up, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and press this one because I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to trim these down to size, because these are oversized blocks. So now I need to trim them down to size. So in our pattern, it says we're going to trim this to a 2.5 by 4.5. So I'm going to take a Creative Grids ruler. This is a 4.5 by 8.5 inch ruler. The first thing I want you to see is this V right here in this ruler. That V is going to go right here in this V, just like this. See how that lines right up? Now I know that's the perfect place to cut this. Let's kind of move, kind of gathering stuff along my mat here. I know it's not going to spin very well. There we go. So now I can cut this on this side, just like that. So I know I have cut exactly a 1/4 inch on the other side of this. Okay, now my measurement was 2.5 by 4.5. So I'm going to turn my ruler over, and I'm going to use the side that has the 1/2 inch first. All my black numbers are showing right side up to me. This is the 1/2 inch side of the Creative Grids ruler. Now I'm going to find 2.5 right here, and I'm going to line up that solid line with my fabric right there. And I'm going to trim this. Okay. Now the next cut, now I have to trim the edges, right? Because this is way too big. Let's measure this. This is almost 5 inches. This is way too big. I know it's 2.5, but it is nowhere close to 4.5. So I'm going to set this on my mat. This ruler is 4.5 inches wide. So I'm going to put this ruler on here. And now I can just slide it back and forth, back and forth. What I'm looking for is I'm going to line up exactly where this dark blue V comes, right here and right here. You see that? It's exactly where I want this ruler. So I'm going to trim this side, leave my ruler there, turn it around, and cut this side. All right, so now I have a flying geese. It's exactly 2.5 by 4.5, or a 2 by 4, because that's what they finish to. All right, that's one way to trim it. That's using just a regular ruler. So I've got a lot of different steps I have to take to trim that out. Let me show you how to trim it using the Ultimate Flying Geese tool by Deb Heatherly. This tool is incredible. You're going to trim two sides, one side, turn it, and trim the other two sides. So it's half as much finagling with the ruler. I love that. So first of all, on this ruler, you're going to see that Creative Grids has given you a finished size, and they list all the sizes of the flying geese that you can do. There's a lot of them. We're following D, which is a 2x4 finished size, 2.5 by 4.5 unfinished size. So this tells me what my first cut is. I cut my first square to 5 3/4, and that is what I started with right here, this navy blue square. I cut my smaller squares to 3 1/4. That's what all these blue dot squares were cut to. All right, so it's telling me how to cut for fast flying geese. So once you know the method on making flying geese, all you need is this ruler. You don't have to go search for the directions, because if you're like me, those directions disappear about 3 minutes after I open the ruler. They're gone, and I don't see them again. Creative Grids is smart. They put that right on this ruler. All right, so now let's look at this ruler. We want to find trim 1. You have trim 1. The other side says trim 2. We're going to do trim 1 first. Turn it over. And again, I'm following D. So I'm lining up this D black and white dash line right here and right here. You see my 1/4 inch mark is right here. You see that's where that's sitting? Exactly on the point of my flying geese. Perfect. That's where I want it. I also have a confirmation right here. It says 2x4. So it's just confirming again, you are cutting the right size. So I know I'm cutting the right size. I'm going to hold my tool. I'm going to cut once. I'm going to spin my mat. I'm going to cut a second time. I'm going to turn my mat yet again. Now I'm ready to trim 2. I simply drop my ruler. Again, I'm using D, right? This is D, 2x4. I know exactly what I'm doing. It's the same black and white dash lines. Now these lines line up here, here, and in the V. It just sits right in there. Now I trim here, turn, and trim again. Look how cool that is. Perfect. So it's a lot less hassle to use this tool, and it does 8 different sizes. I love that. Okay, so that's the first element of this patchwork block of the month, is you're making fast flying geese. This is how you do it, and we do give color diagrams on how to do this. All right, so I'm going to clear all this off, and we'll go on to our second element. All right, I'm back, and now I'm going to show you how to do half square triangles. So a favorite method of ours is to use star singles. We love star singles. They make half square triangles fast, easy, and very, very accurate, and that's why we use them as much as we do. A lot of times when you see a lot of the same half square triangle used in a quilt, we will definitely incorporate star singles. They come in different sizes. Today, I'm going to be using a 2-inch half square triangle. That means that the block is finishing at 2 inches, not unfinished. Finished size is 2 inches. All right, we have all these sizes on the website. You might want to jump over and pick up the other sizes for other projects that you have when you see how quick this is. All right, so let's take a look at this. So I have a paper of star singles right here. These papers measure about 6 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my fabric larger than the paper. On the star singles, it says to cut your fabric at 6 inches, but that's exactly what you need. We prefer to overcut and trim it down. That just makes more sense to us. I feel like our blocks are much more accurate when we do it that way. So we cut our blocks to 6 1/2. So I have a dark blue, and I have this really cool blue dot. I love that blue dot. I'm going to put my 2 fabrics right side together. I'm going to take my star single and set on top. So on this star single, I want you to note all the numbers. So number 1 has the arrows going up and it comes to a black dot. And then number 2 goes this way to number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's all we're going to do is we're going to sew on all of those lines, pivoting on the black dots. All right? So I did that ahead of time. Here's what this looks like when you sew this. I came on here with number 1. I did reduce my stitch length all the way down because reducing your stitch length will perforate the paper and make the paper much easier to tear off your block. All right, so we start all the way out here, and I came on at 1 all the way around, and you can see my little bitty stitches. So I just pin this 4 times in the corners. That's all the pins you need to hang on to this. All right, so let me show you what we do now. I'm going to take my pins out. I'm definitely going to use a spinning mat. Today I have the Creative Grids rotating mat on set with me. I love this mat. It's very easy to spin and it's very safe. Whenever I put pressure down, this thing does not move. Okay, so I'm just going to use a 4.5 by 8.5 inch ruler. What I want to do right now is I want to cut on this solid line along the outside. So I'm just going to cut and rotate my mat. All right, so I've got all 4 of those cut. So now I need to cut this in half, all right? So I'm just going to take my next solid line in the center. I'm going to cut this straight in half, just like that. Now I'm going to cut on the solid lines. Keep moving around your block. This one. Let's cut this one. And the last one is this one. All right, just like that. All right, the next thing I need to do is I need to remove the paper. So I'm going to take the paper, I'm going to fold it, and I'm just going to kind of crease that with my fingernail. I'm going to hang on to it right here on this corner. I'm just going to start to tear it right there. This tears right off, and then this piece releases immediately. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of these. Then I'm going to press these out. I'll crease it and tear it right off. Just like that. These come off quick and easy. This is not painful, kind of like paper piecing, but a lot easier because all the paper is exposed and it comes off really easy. You're not digging in there with tweezers for the paper, which I like. All right, so now I'm going to take this over to my pressing mat. I'm going to turn these over because I'm going to press to the navy blue. All right, so my iron is hot. I'm going to set my seam, and then I'm just going to open this right up, just like that. I'm going to press these toward the navy. Let's do the next one. Just like that. All right. Now, if these little dog ears bother you, you can just quickly trim these off with a pair of scissors. Sometimes I trim them, sometimes I don't. I'll be honest with you. Depends. It just depends on the day, I guess, right? Okay, so let's measure this. I want to see how accurate this is. Look at that. That is dead on 2.5 by 2.5. That's amazing, right? No squaring up, nothing. These are ready to go into your project, just like that. So let's say you don't have star singles. Now what do? Well, you're going to take your squares and you're going to cut your squares in half twice. You cut them in half and in half again, and you're going to get squares that look like this. So now, remember how we drew our line on the back of those flying geese? We're going to do exactly the same thing on this square. I'm going to draw 2 lines, one on this side And I'm going to do one on the other. Just like that, using the seam guide from Creative Grids. So instead of drawing a line down the middle and just sewing on either side, now I have a line to sew on. I'm going to put the two together, just like this. I'm going to put a pin in this on each side, just because I don't want these squares to walk away from each other. Just like that. So now we have this pinned and ready to go. We sew on the line on each side, and this is what it looks like right here. Okay? So I'm going to remove my pins. I'm now just going to cut it. Remember how we cut those flying geese, right? I took my 1/4 inch, put it right on one of those seam lines, and cut, just like that. So now I'm going to go to my iron. I think my iron turned off. All right, so I'm going to press to the navy blue again. So now I'm putting the navy blue on top, and I'm going to set my seam and press it up. Just do a couple of them here. All right. Now I want to trim this up to 2.5. So what I'm going to use is a 2.5 by 2.5 inch ruler by Creative Grids. So this has a long diagonal right down the center. I am simply going to place this right on my block, just like this. So you see how much I have to trim all the way around. This is why a spinning mat, this is the best, most safest way to cut this. Here we go. All right, there we go. And now I have a 2.5 by 2.5 inch square. That's how to make them if you don't have star singles or with star singles. You pick whichever way works for you. Directions for both are in the pattern, and you're good to go. I'm going to clear this up, and I'll be back with the next element. Hi everyone, I'm back, and we're going to make hourglass units. Hourglass units are a lot of fun in a block. They just add so much character to a block, and I see a lot of my family and friends who don't quilt look at it and go, now how did you make that? Well, I'm here to tell you they're quick and easy, and I'm going to show you tips and techniques that I use to get the centers perfect. All right? So here's where we're starting. So I have 2 squares of fabric, and this is just going to be your typical half square triangle, giant half square triangle, right? So I'm going to again use my seam guide on the back. I'm just going to center this, and what I'm doing is I'm centering the point right here in this groove. So I make sure I'm centered, and I'm just going to draw a line on each side, just like that. Okay. Again, you've seen this. You sew on each side, and then what do? Yep, we cut it right in half, just like that. And then we cut. Now, I have a half square triangle, right, that looks like this. Okay, so I'm going to make a half square triangle like this, and I'm going to press that to the blue. You can see how I did that. Fix that little bit right there. There we go. All right, so we press this to the blue. So I made another one exactly the same way, and I've pressed this one to this blue as well. All right, so now I'm going to take these 2 half square triangles, right? I'm going to turn this one over, and we're going to nest them together. So that's why you're pressing to this blue on both of these. So when I open this up, that is my hourglass unit. That's what I want this to look like. So these 2 blues are opposite. So that's why pressing this one this direction and pressing this one this direction, these 2 seams nest together perfectly in the center. All right. So let's turn this over to the cream side, because this side is where I'm going to draw my lines. There it is. I'm going to take my seam guide again, and I'm going to just draw here. Turn this around. Whoop. Kind of bounces around on that seam allowance because it's got a ridge in it. We're going to do this. Okay. Now I'm going to pin this together. I definitely do not want these centers to shift. So I am nesting these seams together, and I'm actually going to pin that seam allowance just like this. So there's no way that's going anywhere. Let's make sure that's right. Wow. You see how perfect that is? That's exactly what I want that to look like when I sew that. All right. So I'm going to nest these two together and pin that seam allowance just like that. All right. So I'm going to sew and sew. Just like that. Okay. So now what do? We trim it. Yeah, you guessed it. Now we're going to trim it again. Here we go. I'm using the 1/4 inch mark right on the seam line, just like we did before. And I'm going to cut it one more time. All right, you excited to see what it looks like? I am. Look at that, it's perfect. I love that. All right, so let's press this. Now this one, I'm actually going to press this seam open. So I'm going to fold to the side. This little Panasonic iron works really well for that. It's got this tip on it that just kind of separates the seam just like that. You can use a little bit of steam if you need to. Hang on to that for a minute. Oh, that looks great. Oh, that one is perfect. Let's go ahead and press out the second one. Okay, there we go. That one looks good too. Look at that. Those are perfect. I just love them. All right, now we're going to trim this up to 4.5 by 4.5. The very best way to do that, the Creative Grids 4.5 inch square. You cannot go wrong with a square ruler of 4.5 by 4.5. You're going to use it a lot in this quilt. Most of the blocks are squared to 4.5 before you're proceeding. This is the ruler to buy. All right, so I'm going to take this. This ruler has a white circle exactly in the center. It's like a bullseye. That's telling you that is dead center. You have white lines on either side. You also have a diagonal line that's going to run right along one of your diagonals. Let me show you how this goes on here. Just like that. You see that? That circle is exactly in the center, and I can see there's not very much to trim up, just a little bit on all 4 sides. Well, let's go ahead and do that. And here, again, this rotating mat is just invaluable. Oh, I'm getting that off just a little bit. Let me straighten that back out and go backwards 1 cut. Put it back on. There we go. There we go. And there's our block, just like that. You're going to go through, trim up your hourglass units, and they go in to your quilt, turning which way? Turning every which way. All right, and that is the hourglass block. I'm going to clean this up. When I come back, we'll go on to the next. All right, everyone, I'm back. This is the cat's cradle block. Now, cat's cradle block sounds a little bit intimidating, and we are using triangles. So when you're cutting your triangles, before you cut triangles, I'm always going to use some sizing in my fabric. Some best press, magic sizing, whatever you have. Spray the back of your fabric with that and then press it dry with the iron. That makes all the difference in the world when you're using triangles, when you're working with triangles. So a cat's cradle block is a triangle, a square, and 2 triangles. Let me see if I can get these on here right. This one goes like this. This one goes like this. All right. This is how my block is going to lay out. All right. So where do we start? Well, we're going to start with a square. We're going to take our first triangle, flip them right sides together, and I'm only lining up this 90-degree angle right here. That's the only thing you're going to line up. All right, we're not going to worry about the points because you see how my points extend beyond. That's a good thing. That's an oversize because we're going to trim it down. That way your block is more exact. I love that. All right, so now we take this to the sewing machine and we sew a 1/4 inch here to here. Just like this. All right, so I did that here. Let's press this. Again, I'm always going to heat up my seam first. Always, always, always. And I'm just going to press that right to the blue, the darker blue. All right. Now I have this little dog ear right here. I am going to snip that off because my next triangle that comes on, where'd he go? Let's take him. My next triangle goes like this, right? And see, if I had not snipped that dog ear off, it would be in my way when I would start sewing. So you know you've done this right when you can pin this on. I'm going to pin it like this. And right here, in this V right here, is a 1/4 inch. This is exactly where you're going to start sewing, is right here is a 1/4 inch. Sew all the way to the end. All right? Just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to press this again. So I'm going to heat that seam up, flip it over, and press. All right, now comes a trim part because right here is much greater than 1/4 inch and I need to shorten that down. I don't want to try to put another triangle on this because there's no way this point is going to hit my triangle, right? This is my next seam. Okay, you see that? There's no way that's going to hit there. So I have to trim this up. So what I like to use is a Creative Grids 4.5 by 8.5. Remember this V that we showed you when I was doing the Flying Geese block way back in the beginning? I'm going to use that same V. I'm going to set this in the corner just like this. So I know that's a 1/4 inch. You see what else I'm lining up? I'm lining up right here in this square. So this diagonal lines exactly meet here. You see the excess is all out here. So let's go ahead and trim that off. Just like that. Not very much. I did not trim a lot off of that. All right, now we're ready to add this half square triangle. So I'm going to put the 2 right sides together. And I want you to see immediately how this light blue triangle on the bottom, you see how it's bigger all the way around? That's on purpose. Again, oversized, so we're going to trim your block down. That's on purpose. All right, so I'm going to put a pin in the center because I want to hang on to that point right there where I have to hit, right? And I know we're going to have to pin these 2 outer triangles because those are definitely going to walk away from us when we're sewing. I'm going to put a couple pins in this just like that. All right, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch here, across here, all the way down. All right, and this is what that looks like. So I have a 1/4 inch all the way across, and you can see my light blue triangle is slightly larger. Okay, so let's press this towards the light blue triangle. So we're going to heat this up, open this up, and press. And now it's kind of an odd looking block because obviously the light blue triangle is bigger. These don't meet right. Let's fix it. Again, we're going to go to our favorite 4.5-inch square ruler. So I only have to trim 2 sides of this, remember? So I'm going to use the diagonal. I'm going to line up with the diagonal on my block, just like that. Now you see how these edges are all perfectly even? I don't need any squaring there whatsoever. I just need to square this light blue here and here, just like that. So again, I didn't trim a lot off of this. You see, not a lot of waste, but now I have a perfect cat's cradle 4.5-inch square. And that's the cat's cradle block. All right, I'll be back with the last block in just a minute. I'm back and I'm going to make a square and a square unit this time. So what I'm starting with is a 4.5-inch square. It's already cut to size, it's fine. I have 4 smaller blocks. These are 2.5-inch square. All right, so to do a square and a square, accuracy is going to come into play here. The more accurate you are, the better your square and a square unit is actually going to be square when you are done. All right, how do we achieve that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a friction pen and I am actually going to draw the line corner to corner. And I'm going to do the same on this one. A square and a square unit, I work opposite corners at a time. What I mean by that is I'm going to do this corner and this corner. All right, so I'm just going to sew corner to corner in opposite corners. All right, and it looks like this. So now, yep, we're going to take our 1/4 inch and I'm going to trim these both out. Just like that. All right, now let's press this towards the darker blue. What I'm looking for when I open this up is I want to make sure that these edges match right here and these edges match. See how my edges match? I know that I've sewn this correctly. So I'm finger pressing that so that I'm trying not to stretch that. Even though it's already sewn, it is a bias seam, right? Because you're sewing on the bias of that square. It will still stretch out. You can still stretch this when you're pressing. So be very careful when you're pressing this unit. Okay, you see this is perfectly like this. So now I'm going to work the other 2 corners. So I'm going to put a square here and another square right here. And I'm going to sew corner to corner, just like this. And I'm going to trim it here and again on this side. All right, and now I'm going to press it one more time. So again, what am I looking for? I'm looking to see that when I open this up, this matches. See how it matches the one next to it? Perfectly, right there. It's not distorted at all. It's not turned wonky. It still looks like a square. Just like that. Now, if you're worried about doing a square and a square unit, and you have a problem getting them to come out square like that when you're trimming these, you sew this. Before you cut it, press it. And make sure that this lines up exactly in the corner. Then you know it's safe to cut it. If it doesn't meet and it's turned sideways or wonky, Stop right there, take your stitching out, square this back up, make sure everything's in alignment, and sew it again, and then again, press it, and make sure that that's exactly where you want it before you cut it. That way you can still adjust it, and you don't have to start over with a new block, because once you cut it, you cut it. This way you can test it before cutting it and make sure that it's correct. All right? All right, and that is a square and a square, and this should measure, again, 4.5 inches. And it does. That's what I started with. That's what we ended with. That's the goal. All right, and that's square and a square block. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've picked up some tips and techniques on how to get perfect patchwork blocks. They always start with good tools. I've definitely used my Clover patchwork pins, a rotating mat by Creative Grids. This is an amazing mat. You saw me use this with every single block that I did. I use this mat. My seam guide, I use this with almost every one. Your 4.5 by 8.5 inch ruler is an excellent tool to have on standby. I use this one a lot. Your 4.5 inch square. Make sure your blocks are square before you move on. That way they all fit together perfectly, and your blocks will be 12.5 inches square when you put 3 4.5 inch blocks together. All right. Ultimate Flying Geese tool. I can't say enough good things about this tool. And again, a little 2.5 inch square if you're making your own half square triangles. This is always a handy tool to have. Things I did not use, but I do have on camera with me today, is my seam ripper. Thank goodness I didn't need that. I have my Schmetz needles, my Carrera thread set. Black, white, and dark gray come in the Aurifil Carrera thread set, and we do use the Aurifil upstairs in the sewing studio every single day. That's all we have on our machines upstairs. Our machines love Aurifil thread. Can't say enough good things about that. We do use the seam guides. If you have a problem finding your 1/4 inch, definitely look at a seam guide. Seam guides are easy to install. They have full directions. The seam guide setter will help you get an accurate scant 1/4 inch. That's important as well. It comes with the setter and 6 of the seam guides. This is a refill pack of seam guides. Pick those up if you have a problem sewing 1/4 inch. The other thing I have is some diagonal seam tape by Cluck Cluck Sew. This, if you don't want to draw any lines at all, but simply rely on guides on your machine bed, the Cluck Cluck Sew tape is perfect for that. On Olfa rotary blades, extra blades, I did start with a fresh blade. When I'm cutting on all 4 sides of a template or a ruler like that, I definitely want it to cut the first time. I don't want to have to go back and forth over something to cut. Treat your rotary cutter to a new blade. Your arm will thank you for it, because you'll see how much less pressure it takes to actually cut through a seam. And I always have Clover Wonder clips. Why do I have Clover Wonder clips? Because I use the heck out of those little things. I find so many uses for Clover Wonder clips. We use them on our binding on every single quilt. That's why you're going to see them. We also clip things together if you're trying to keep blocks separate, blocks together, fabrics together. Clover Wonder clips are amazing. So that's what I've got on set with me. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you again soon on another Shabby Fabrics tutorial.